Good morning, super scientists. This is Mrs. Doan with Mrs. Doan's Science Lab, and today we're going to go over our super science vocab for food chains. And today is Tuesday the 14th, and I went outside for a few minutes earlier this morning, and it is beautiful weather outside today, at least where I'm at, and I'm looking forward to eating lunch out there and enjoying the weather. So, what is a food chain? That is the subtitle. All organisms need food. Some can make their own food. Plants can do this. Other living things depend on other organisms for food. Some animals eat plants. Some animals eat other animals. Some animals eat both plants and animals, just like I was talking about in that food chain rap that I sang for y'all. So, a food chain, stop, collaborate, and listen. Food chain is a series of living things that depend on one another for food. So, I'm going to go ahead and follow along if you will. A food chain is a series of living things that depend on one another for food. Okay? So, a food chain shows the path of food from one living thing to another. So, like when you're creating your food chains, which that's something in the future that we'll be doing, a lot of kiddos, or people just in general, their instinct is to point the arrow towards like what is eating what. So, but actually the arrow should be pointing in the direction that the energy is flowing. So in this example right here, you have this grass, then a mouse, and then a hawk. And if you look close enough, the arrow is the energy starts out here at the producer, then it goes to the first consumer, and then the energy flows from this first consumer to the second consumer. All right. So producer, herbivore, carnivore. That's an example of a simple food chain. Let's look at the great blue heron food chain. Starts with algae. Algae are tiny living things growing in the water. Algae make their own food. The algae are eaten by a fish called a channel catfish. The heron eats the catfish. The catfish depends on the algae for food. The heron depends on the catfish for food. Each living thing is a link in the food chain. So if you think about it, even ourselves are part of a big food chain or food web, which is multiple food chains linked together in some way. What are the roles in a food chain? Producer, consumer, and decomposer are roles in a food chain. Let's look at each role. Every food chain starts with a producer. Stop, collaborate, and listen. Producers are living things that can make their own food. So, producer, living things that make their own food. All right. And the process of a producer making their own food is photosynthesis, which y'all should be familiar with, especially third grade and up. They talk a lot about that in K through second grade. All right. Plants are producers, algae are producers too. What comes next? Some animals eat plants for food. Such an animal is called a consumer. Stop, collaborate, and listen. All right, so consumer is sorry, I had to reread that. I was like, that doesn't make sense, but now I get it. All right, so consumer eats other organisms to get its energy. Okay, so I had to change it a little bit to make more sense. So a consumer eats other organisms to get its energy. So if a consumer that just eats producers, that one would be an herbivore. If on the opposite side, if it's a consumer that just eats other animals, no producers at all, or not directly, then that is a carnivore. And if it is an organism that eats producers and other consumers, then that is an omnivore. And actually, the cool thing that I learned years ago was that the reason why you can tell that humans are, or actually any living consumer, like any living thing that's a consumer, I should say, you just look at their teeth. So if like our teeth, you have your molars in the back, and then you have like your, I know there's an actual correct word for this, your little vampire teeth, and then, or canine teeth, and then these flat, they're not flat, but they have, they're the thinner teeth, right, in the front. So the fact that we have all those different kinds of teeth, that means that naturally we're omnivores, meaning we can eat other consumers as well as producers. And then there's people out there that don't like to eat producers at all. They just mainly eat, eat animals like cows and such, eat burgers and whatnot. And then on the flip side, there's people that choose to just eat producers, like vegetarian and plant-based diets. So, but naturally, we have the option of both. Whereas, like if I were to look, and I'm not gonna do this to my cat because she would not like me messing with her mouth. But if you were to look, you could probably look up online a picture of like a cat's like mouth and see all their teeth. They don't have any flat teeth like molars. They're all just little spiky things, or spiky teeth. And because of that, cats are naturally carnivores. That's why it's also good to make sure that any cat food you give your cats is free, is like grain free and free of other non-meat products, right? So a very protein rich diet is what carnivores need. So that's why it's better to get that kind of food for your carnivore pets. Like dogs are also carnivores by nature. And then, so now if you see, well, I'm trying to think of, okay, so like your lizards, they are herbivores, or like rabbits are herbivores, because well, most of like with the case of rabbits, they do have like those long but flat, sharp teeth. So, but that's actually for like ripping apart bigger plants and stuff. But if you were to look on the inside, all the rest of their teeth are flat, and so the flat teeth is an herbivore. Anyways, so a mouse is a consumer, eats grass and seeds. Consumers eat only plants, are called herbivores. Not all consumers eat plants. Some consumers eat other animals. For example, hawks eat mice. Consumers that eat only other animals are called carnivores. Some animals eat both plants and animals. They are called omnivores. So, basically restating what I just thoroughly explained previously. Which roles do you think the organisms in the heron's food chain play? The algae are the producers. The catfish and the heron are consumers. Not all plants and animals get eaten. Plant leaves fall on the ground. Animals grow old and die. What happens to them? A decomposer, so stop, collaborate, and listen, is a kind of consumer. Decomposers break down dead things and wastes into small parts. These small parts then become part of the soil. So your earthworms. Earthworms are decomposers. Like if you were to have a composting barrel where you put all your scrap foods and other things, and you put some earthworms in there, they would continually eat and break it down, decompose it, and then that turns into soil or fertilizer, which then you can then put in other soils that you're like growing different plants in and whatnot. So it's actually, decomposers are very important. So decomposer is a type of consumer that breaks down dead things and waste. Sorry, I got an email. Things and waste into small parts. Moving on. Next subtitle is, how does energy flow in a food chain? How do you get energy? You get energy from food. In a food chain, energy flows from the producer to consumer to the next consumer and so on. For example, energy flows from seed to mouse to hawk. Producers make their own food by photosynthesis. Okay, so photosynthesis is process in which producers make their own food. Okay? They use the sun's energy to make sugars from carbon dioxide and water. The sugars are the food. The producer uses some of the food to grow and stores the rest. What happens to the energy that a producer stores? First, an animal eats the producer. Then the energy stored in that producer moves to the animal. In the heron food chain, energy in the algae moves to the catfish. The catfish uses some of the energy. The catfish stores the rest in its body. What happens next? When the heron eats the catfish, energy is moved to the heron. This is how energy flows from one living thing to another in a food chain. So we have this great diagram right here. You have sun's beams, and then here's a picture of grass, and then notice the direction it's flowing. So the energy flows from the sun to the grass. Remember, the grass is going to use some of the energy and then store the rest. So then the caterpillar, or no, that's not a caterpillar, that's a grasshopper. The grasshoppers eats some grass. It uses some of the energy it got from the grass and then stores the rest. Then the snake comes along and eats the grasshopper. Well, now the energy that was stored in this consumer, the grasshopper, is now given to this consumer, who uses some of that energy and then stores the rest. And then it comes along the hawk, who's the top consumer. The hawk eats the snake. So really, the beginning resource is the sun's energy, and then all of these, when they get to here to the hawk, is in a way having some kind of energy that links back to the very beginning. So that's what makes it a chain, right? So then the hawk uses some of the energy and then might store some for later if they can't find other energy sources or whatnot. But there's nothing really above the hawk in this food chain. So next subtitle is what happens to a food chain if a part is lost. Every living thing in a food chain has a role. If one part of the food chain changes, the change affects the others. So think about when we were testing circuits, right? That electrical energy, if we broke a connection, that affected the rest of the circuit. Same thing goes with food chains. If you take away part of it, it's going to affect the rest in some way or another. So think about a field in a forest ecosystem. The field has many flowering plants. There are also bees. Bees use nectar from flowers for food. Birds and spiders eat bees. What would happen if all the flowering plants died? If the plants were gone, there would be less food for all of the animals. Think again about the heron food chain. What would happen if the algae died? The catfish would have less food. As a result, some of the catfish would die. If there were fewer catfish, the herons would have less to eat. Some of the herons might go somewhere else to find food. Some of them might die, unfortunately. The plant and animal populations in a food chain depend on one another. Anything that affects one part of the chain can affect the whole chain. Changes in a food chain can affect a whole ecosystem. That's a big reason why it's super important to not pollute our aquatic ecosystems, especially ones containing coral reefs, because coral reefs are ecosystems within a big aquatic ecosystem. So it's very important to the rest of the ocean. If all the flowering plants in a field die, other animals in the forest ecosystem are affected. For example, rabbits that feed on the plants would not have enough to eat. Animals that feed on the rabbits might not have enough to eat either. So another reason why bees make me nervous, but in the same token, bees and other pollinators are creatures or organisms, I mean, that will go and either eat producers and then spread the seeds through its, its dung. Another way to say that that's not scientific, sorry. Or bees will go and get the nectar from the plants and then gets pollen on it, and then when it's going to other flowers or other, other flowers maybe in that same area or other areas, the pollen that gets on the bees then spreads, and then that's how it keeps that producers keep reproducing more plants. So these are important. Next subtitle is, do environmental changes affect ecosystems? You know that changes in populations can affect an ecosystem. Can changes in the environment affect an ecosystem too? Yes. Changes in the environment affect living things differently. Some living things have bodies or ways of behaving that help them survive changes in the environment. Those are, called adaptations. Other living things leave, or if they don't leave, then they just die. One change is drought. Drought is a long period of time with very little rain. So stop, collaborate, and listen. That is our last vocab word. So drought is a long period of time with very little rain. Why is this a problem? Without water, plants begin to die. Fewer plants mean less food for the animals. So on the opposite spectrum of things, too little water can affect the producers. So if you're experiencing a drought, it affects the producers. But then also in the case if it gets too much water, then essentially the producers are overwatered, and if that happens for too long a period of time, those producers will, die off. So it has to have a nice balance. Another change in the environment is flood, just like I was saying. During a flood, a large amount of water covers the area that is usually dry. In a flood, plants are covered with water. The water kills some plants. Many animals must go somewhere else to find dry land. Erosion can also change the environment. Erosion happens when wind or water carries away soil or small pieces of rock. So, think of a field with a few plants. The wind blows away the soil, and if it blows across the field, then there's less soil for the plants to grow in. And that, my friends, is the end of our nonfiction book titled How Are Living Things Connected to Their Ecosystem? I hope that this was beneficial for your science learning. And until next time, so long, farewell to you, my friend. Goodbye for now, until we meet again. I said so long, farewell to you, my friend. Goodbye for now, until we meet again. Bye, guys.